Hey everyone, and welcome back to Story Deep Dive. This week we have something a little different, a little special for you. So since we have an extra Sunday in the month, Dana and I thought that it would be fun to just record a little bit more of like a casual chat with each other. So we've got some questions that are specific to each other and our niches and the way that we approach work, and we're just gonna sit, we're gonna drink our coffee, and we're gonna have a chat. So Dana, anything you want to say before we get rolling? I've got my first question locked and loaded, and I'm real excited to ask it.
No, dive in. I'm ready.
Okay, so I want to start with this like more fun question, which is, who is your favorite romance main male character? And then I want to add like a follow-up question to ask, what do you think makes a good male lead for a romance?
Oh, that is so easy to start off with, Rachel. Thank you for
Lobbing you a softball.
that was a sneaky curveball. Okay, because it was a loaded question. So it's really hard to pick my favorite female character. I would have to say that listeners they will get to experience him in Indigo. And which is Galen. Listen, the Black Daniel, he has always been one of my favorite characters, main male characters. And there's another one, and I always forget his name. It's also from a historical romance. I just like very confident, very not necessarily knowledgeable, but who just really occupy their space well. And at the same time, it's that thing that makes them good at what they do, but it's also that thing that rubs the female main character the wrong way. And so she gets underneath it and realizes why he is that way. And so I like a mix. Knox is one of that I really like too, but I wouldn't put him to like my favorite. I would say Galen, and then I'm gonna have to remember this guy's name. He was just so good, and he was good in the worst kind of way. But the point is, yes. And so the second part of that question was, what do I think makes a good female character? I think the thing about this at the end of the day is like what connects to your readers and what makes your stories that much juicier. I like a little bit aloof, a little bit, I'm gonna do my thing because that's what I want to do kind of vibe. I don't want to say I like extra cocky per se, but I do like very confident. And I just like one that knows how to assess what is needed and gets it done. So I guess that's just probably a little bit more of what I like. But I would say at the end of the day, I like it when a main male character is exactly what the female main character needs, but she doesn't know it because it's not what she wants. And the need and want rub is a good push-pull. And so having a little bit of coins in his pocket, having a little bit of oomph in him, having a little bit of dip in his swag, just...
That's always a bonus when he's also just happens to be a billionaire.
You know what I'm saying? Just can make things happen, make people move, make things happen. And I think that always, and it just goes into other areas of the story, but I think that's what it is. And if you're someone writing a story, I believe having a sort of understanding of wrapping your mind around what type of main characters do you identify with and why, and whether they serve that story. And that really is very telling of the kind of stories that I like to read. Yeah, I just like some regular, listen, just good old romance to just dip out and prop your feet up and chill. But I do like for them to have layers and depth, and the depth that they choose to reserve for people that they want to. But at the same time, even without that, they're just a man's man. Okay, that was a long answer.
So, is there? So, also, I just want to apologize. It's like it's storming where we are, so occasionally I'm watching my microphone pick up the thunder. So if that doesn't get out in post, I just apologize in advance. But do all of those categories fall under alpha male, or is alpha male even more specific than just like man's man, like take charge, can get things moving? Is there like a delineation between those?
I would say in general, no, but I would say specific to a story, yes, because I don't think every male character that's confident would be necessarily like alpha energy. I think for me, because a lot of the stories that I like may have some suspense, may have a group dynamic, maybe because you can have someone that's an alpha like energy that's not an alpha in the scope of the environment that they're in, but you still want to have that he can handle his business either way. Like either way, you know what I'm saying? And so, I would say that I guess in general, yes, but not specifically. And I would even say that knowing that for yourself is crucial. Because there are times when I can ask a student or I'm reviewing an outline and I'm like, okay, is this what you're meaning to come across about him? Because that makes a difference in the type of readers you attract and the reader satisfaction with the story. The person who, there are a lot of people who do not like a cinnamon roll or a beta, not beta as in a rank if you're doing paranormal romance, but beta as in a dude that just falls back. I know I don't. I'd be like, aren't you going to say something? The book can't answer. I talk to it like it will. Are you really just going to stand there and look? You know what I mean? And so I think it's important to know that. And also, and there's something to be said about someone that has a quiet strength for me and someone who has that kind of strength that hides it behind sarcasm. I like that too. So it's just, you just gotta, I
There's
don't
a
know.
lot to love in a main male character. A lot of options, a lot of good options.
Too many options. But it's like there are a lot of options, and it also helps you with dynamics of your story. It helps you with ensuring that it aligns with your niche, especially in romance. And so yeah, I could talk about that. That could be a whole episode. Whole episode.
I'm going to make a note to myself in that case of like, we're going to do a whole episode on main male leads. Cause I want to know more. I'm very, very curious about all the different ways that you can create main male characters and how those qualities affect how the story plays out, the dynamic between the main male character and the female leads. You start to see where there are all of these opportunities for variety, like where you could have one type of guy, but then what it looks like depending on what type of female lead you have, right, and what that relationship looks like is gonna change based on, of course, like how you're mixing and matching characteristics. And it helps me understand why you at all times are rocking 50 different pen names and 80 different projects.
Listen, I'm trying to get better. I will say, I think also when you think about that, that's why when people say the thing of like writing the same story, you can write the exact same story a million times and it's a different story. For that reason. You are picking and pulling. They're different, but it's more so of like if you're a baker and you make cakes. That's all you make is cakes. That's all you do. But there's chocolate and there's strawberry and there's lemon and there's whatever. It's amazing. And this is like adjacent. But I remember one time I was going into Starbucks, and we don't go inside a lot, but we were just like taking our time. We go into Starbucks and we go in there, and sometimes they have samples, sometimes they don't, because it's not a huge Starbucks thing. I guess it just depends on the actual store. Where we're in the store, and the barista that's behind the counter is popping. He yelling at everybody, and it's like, hey, like I know him. I don't know him, but whatever. I was just trying to match his energy. And then, so he had these samples, and they had like these little slices of cake and these little cups of the coffee, just to try a new blend. And I reach for the coffee, and he stops me and he says, eat the cake first, then try the coffee.
Oh,
And
yes.
listen, come on, illustration. So I try that. So I'm listening because I'm not a huge sweets person before you drink coffee. Because, I don't load it. So therefore it can take away the flavor and it just doesn't taste right. And so I tried the cake first, like he said, and then the coffee. The coffee tastes so good, and it was black. And then after that, he said, "Now try it again." And then I tried it afterwards. It tastes nasty, and that's how a story is, right? It's like it's all about the ordering in which you do it, the pairing in which you do it, the notes that you're playing with, and I think that's what you can do with characters too. Which I love characters, so that was illustration. I don't know where that, but yeah, he was the bomb.com. And I don't even know what I had. I wish I would have known, but it was good. And so, yeah, it's a part of the process. But with that said, okay, you're going to throw me under a bus. That's why I don't like pre-submitting questions. Because now I want to know, when you are working with someone who is working on a crime story, what are some of those things that is adjacent to your spectrum? Like, what are those things that people look for in a main character? Because I think in romance, we get a benefit of, technically you have two protagonists and you sort of can play off of that. But if you have it where it's just that main one, even if you have a huge cast, it's he or she is carrying the load. And so what are some of those things that someone who is writing a crime, and then if you feel like there's a delineation, like a crime fantasy, a fantasy crime, or what would that be? I know I just went off script. My bad. Sorry,
oh,
not
no,
sorry.
I'm in all fairness. Okay, so just quick background for everybody who's listening. We already tried to record this episode. This happened Friday, so today's a Monday. This was Friday, and Dana, her internet was just on the fritz, and we couldn't get the recording done. And when we started recording, I started with the first question on the list, and then, I don't know, I got a wild hair, and today I was like, I want to start the second one because this one seems fun. So we've already just, like, we've got off script. So when it comes to a main character in a crime specifically, one of the things that audiences are looking for, whether or not, right, and this is the same thing in romance, whether or not they know that this is what they're looking for, one of the things you really want to know for your protagonist is how they uniquely approach investigating. So this is about how they think. This is about the way that they approach, like, the logic of the investigation, the way that they read or don't read people, the way that they interpret information, whether they are someone who's going to throw their weight around or someone who's going to be a little more subtle, a little more sly in, and this is great because we're priming for our discussion of the whistleblower, right? And Gil has a very specific way of approaching people, and it is all about leverage. It's all about leveraging information. It's all about knowing, it's all about what he knows and what he can deduce based on what else he can deduce based on what he knows, and then taking some calculated risks to see if he can get even more information. And that's going to be the thing that makes a protagonist specifically most compelling in a crime story, is their unique approach to investigating, because that's really the core of what a crime story is about. It's about the investigation. It's about piecing together the clues. It's about experiencing the puzzle. So getting to do that through a unique lens is what's going to create that engagement, that additional layer of engagement with the story. So you compare someone like Gil to Sherlock Holmes, who he's had a lot of different iterations. You can think about classical Sherlock Holmes versus, Guy Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes, played by Robert Downey Jr., and the way that he presents, and the fact that he's kind of a know-it-all, and it means that he's always 4 steps ahead of everybody, and the thrill is in watching him be an expert and then getting, like, kind of catching up to wherever he's at. And that's why you have the counterbalance of someone like Watson, who basically kind of takes on the role of the reader where Watson is asking the questions that we're wondering. Watson is someone that Sherlock kind of bounces things off of and asks the questions that the reader is wondering, like, I'm sorry, how did you get from point A to point B? And then, you get Sherlock Holmes and elementary, dear Watson, and all that good stuff. So that's really the big thing you're looking for with the protagonist. And then I'll just say, as kind of like a secondary point to help you determine that is, and we're going to talk about this, I feel I talk about this ad nauseum in the whistleblower episodes, but this is like one of the ways you can find your way in this is, what is the protagonist's work? Like, what do they do for a living that's going to bring them into contact with the case? How do they approach their work? Because sometimes that's an easier way in than just like, ooh, how do they approach the investigation? Especially if they're like an amateur sleuth and they're like, man, I don't freaking, like, they're not a professional. This isn't a thing that they often do. Then when you look at how they approach their work specifically, you can use that to kind of ease your way into, like, well, based on what I know about this, what does this mean about how they're going to approach the case? So if you have an officer, for example, you might have the Spitfire who's always breaking the rules, or the by the book guy, and that's going to inform a lot about how they approach that investigation. So that's kind of how I like to work with protagonists in crime stories specifically, when I'm walking my writers through that.
Okay, so I'm going to actually ask my next question because you actually just laid it up and I think it goes great together. Okay, so then that makes me think about, okay, since Rachel threw me under the bus, yes, my internet was doing some things. Let me tell y'all something. Houston be a I want to say a hot ass mess, so I might as well go ahead and say it. Because we have hurricanes and they always duct tape our everything together anytime a storm happens. So therefore, when it starts storming or it starts getting to, everything gets splotchy. With that said, Rachel sends me over this list of questions and I was like, oh, we're actually writing questions. Okay, that's what we're doing.
I'm still wondering what kind of questions you were expecting me to ask. Like, what's your favorite color? What was the book you loved? Like, what?
I didn't expect you to say that. I just didn't expect to get a list of questions. So with that said, I don't know. What was I expecting other from you? I wasn't surprised, but I was surprised. Okay. And maybe because I got it after a nap. And my brain was like, wait, what? We're writing questions? Like, so me. So with that said, one of the things that I always enjoy discussing with you is about your process that you work with your clients. And I think I find it the most fascinating because I've seen it evolve from when you started working with clients to where you are now. And we are similar in a lot of ways, but I do think there are just like little bitty isms that makes the difference. And I believe the way you walk your clients through the process is also something that people maybe don't realize they need as much as people would probably overlook it, but it really is a great thing to sort of slow your roll a little bit and go through this process so that you really can almost sort of steep yourself in your understanding. And so I know there was a lead up. I would love for you to maybe talk a little bit about how you work with clients. If they're just starting out or they are wanting to sort of identify what area of crime stories they want to tell. I think that would just be a great thing to hear and to have on a recorded line, because I know, but I think people would think they don't need it. But if you had this, you would be on fire because your foundation would be secure. So let's get into it. That's my long question.
That's a great question. You're gonna make me work for it this morning.
That's so right. You started it. Look, I'm just passing the ball.
So this actually is like one of the reasons I created the Crime Writers Workbook, because it did kind of codify those basics that you need to be able to create your crime story. And so it has all of those essential pieces. We go into your protagonist's job, we talk through your suspects and your clues, and then, mapping out the timeline. And so when I'm working with a client, everyone kind of shows up in slightly different places, different degrees of fleshed out. And so I always start with just like, tell me everything you know about your story right now. Just give me the lay of the land. How much do we know? You know, how developed is your, and they tell me everything they know, and I'm able to say, okay, this is how developed the protagonist is. This is how developed the investigation is. You know, all these. So usually they show up with at least a crime, and a sense for kind of like what the basic gist of the story is. They don't always know who did it even at the end. So you're always kind of taking what you know already and filling in those gaps. So a lot of times what I'll do is start with the protagonist and, okay, what subgenre are we in here? Are they a journalist? Are they a police officer? Because that's going to inform how the rest of the story should be playing out. And so if they have that locked in, then we're going to start walking through the investigation, and along the way, fleshing out the suspects and the clues that they're kind of getting. And so we'll get, a lot of times what we kind of have is like, we've got our protagonist and we have an idea of some of the suspects, and then maybe we're a little bit shaky on the clues. These are just kind of generally what I've seen when I've worked with my clients. So we kind of walk the protagonist through, and we walk through that exercise of like the layers of information. So we're looking at, well, where can your protagonist start? And we're, a lot of times, like in the actual coaching calls, we're kind of just brainstorming, like, what are some options? Where could they start? And then I have them take that information and sit with it and keep working the process so that because when you're on a call, there's only so much time to just sit and think about a thing. You're kind of just moving and flowing and going along with it. So then they kind of will take that information and sit with it and think and say, okay, here's the order of events that makes sense. And then they'll kind of bring it back to me and I'll take a look at it. And then we'll go into the next act of like, okay, well, now they're really in the investigation. What does that mean for them? Like when the investigation is in earnest, what is it that they're needing to do? What suspects are they meeting? And a lot of times we'll go back as soon as we get introduced to a clue. Like, this is kind of we're in the ideating process, and then we'll kind of bump into clues and or suspects or witnesses, and we'll take that opportunity to then start fleshing those things out. So we're kind of doing that as if we're following a line, we'll do it almost tangentially, but it's going to lead us back around into the investigation, into moving the plot forward. And so we're looking at okay, well, this suspect, what is their motive? What is their alibi? What kinds of lies are they telling, to help them so that when they show up to write, they have a basic idea of who this person is and how they're going to behave on the page. And then same thing with clues, of just kind of trying to identify, okay, what does this clue mean? What does it seem to point to? What does it kind of indicate to the protagonist they need to do next? Because the flow of an investigation is a logical kind of series of cause and effect, right? I get this thing, which means I need to do this thing, which leads to getting this thing, which means I need to do this thing. And so I'm kind of trying to pull them through that whole process, and then developing the details along the way that are going to set them up for success when they're writing. And that sometimes is going to mean like backtracking a little bit and saying, ooh, you know what that means? We need to set this thing up over here, or we need to, make a minor adjustment here. And that's why I like to go through the plotting process with my clients first, even if elements of the plot may change once they get into the writing process, because writing just generates so much discovery. So I want to spend just enough time plotting so that they can write forward with intention, but not try to perfect the plot without ever having put a word on the page. Because especially for writers in their first, I'll say 1 to 3 books possibly, it requires the writing to understand a lot, like so many details come out in the actual writing process that it may mean some light revisions to your plot. So your plot is logical and cohesive, but then there's going to be more details and more discovery in that process, which means we will make some tweaks to the plot, and that's appropriate until until you get really, really well established in your own style and how you write and how your stories flow. That's then you'll start to have those plots that you can pretty much like plot through, and for the most part know that this is kind of how the story's going to go and it's going to work that way. But for newer writers, you just won't know that until you've really gotten onto the page and worked with the words yourself. So that was a lot of words. That was pretty much everything. That was everything for the first draft and half for the second draft.
One of the things that I love about hearing you walk through that, I had another direction in my brain, but this was really good. It makes me think about whenever I'm working with clients and they come to me so that we can lay down the groundwork for a series. Mm-hmm. And you have sometimes when someone tells me they want to do that, and when they realize what that means to do that, they were like, how can you do this? This is too much information. And then when you step back and you say, well, if you have no clue what's going to happen in this case in chapter blah, 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 and it doesn't even have to be a specific chapter, but if you don't have any clue what's going to happen roughly in the third act, if you're working in a 4-act structure, then being able to take full advantage of that in Act 1 is nearly impossible. Or in a series, if you have no idea how book 3 or 4 or whatever connects with book 1, then what happens is you can miss some really great opportunities to set a layup for that book. So even if it's not that even if you are not aiming to nail down every single detail, having a strong spine or skeleton of where you are going, and that crime sort of being the spine, or that investigation being the spine, makes it so that they really can begin to finesse the details or get even better at the layering, because that's where your secret sauce and your style can be. But you can't have any style if your spine is wobbly, right? Like it would be a hot mess. Like it would read well, but it wouldn't be logically sound. Do you find that process differs? I mean, I know in general, but like how it looks when you are working with someone that has only had one or a few books or less under their belt versus what the process of walking through that is like when you have someone that has been more established. Would you still have that sort of same walkthrough, or do you find that what you're focusing on is different?
The process stays roughly the same, but I think the speed and the ease of that process is what really increases with that experience, because having a few books under your belt means that you're a little clearer on what an investigation needs to look like. And so it's easier to, even if you're working with a new protagonist, to follow that through line, because you've just gotten those reps in of having done, you've written 3 or 5 investigations, or 10 or however many investigations you've written, and so it's easier to kind of map it out. And I think also to see the opportunities, because once you get that experience, right, you know what a setup feels like, or when you're like, ooh, and you're able to more quickly and more easily flag those opportunities, because that's what getting your repetition in publishing multiple books will do. And I think that's something that, and then I promise I'm going to shift into a question for you, because I feel like I've just been like yakking.
Focus, girl. It's good.
But I think this is something that new writers get wrong a lot of the time. It's not get wrong. That sounds too harsh. I love you, new writers. It's all good. But that it's a misunderstanding that happens for writers writing their first novel. They're looking for that first novel to be perfect at the plotting stage. Like they want their plot to be airtight and not write a single word until the plot has been perfected, or they start writing, they get stuck in the middle, and then they start over again, but they're asking too much of any given part of the process. So having a plot, and then expecting that plot is not going to change. You're going to plot it and it's going to be that's exactly it, and nothing is going to change. Again, especially in that first novel, because you discover so much through the writing process that you have no idea. Sometimes you don't even actually know what it is you're wanting to write until you start writing and you're like, oh my gosh, this is actually what I want this story to be. But the likelihood that you discover that flawlessly in the plotting process is very, very, very small. And so putting so much pressure on that first book to, be perfect, but again, in the plotting stage, in the early stages, rather than going through the process of understanding how to write a story and working your way through learning your own creative process, which is one of the most difficult parts of writing your first novel. You're not just writing a novel, you're also discovering your own creative process. And I tell that to every first session that every client has with me. I'm always like, all right, this is your first novel. Here's 2 things that are, it's going to take a little longer because you're trying to solve for both of these problems. What is the story, creating a structure, writing the story, and what is my own creative process? And so putting too much pressure on the plotting process, thinking it's going to be perfect and unchangeable, is going to keep you from ever writing a single word. And that's an easy mistake, I think, to make. Yeah.
What's interesting is, and the same is true for people who are seasoned. I know there are so many times where I'm like, you know what, you can't fix everything. If you wait to fix everything, you will never release anything. So pick the thing that you want to get better at in this book and with this story, and then make an assessment, and then aim to get better in that, maybe get even better in that, maybe character development or your twist, or whatever you've selected. But trying to do everything at once is always asking for overwhelm, whether it's during the plotting process or during the writing process, or really hits the fan in the editing process. So yeah. Definitely. I totally agree.
Yeah. And that's something I've always loved about your approach is, you're always encouraging your writers to write multiple books. Like, for people who want to be writers, they don't just want to write one. I mean, there are writers out there who want this, but most of the writers that we work with aren't trying to write their magnum opus and they write this one perfect, glorious work and then they never write anything again. That most of the people that I don't think I work with anybody who is, like that, like who that's what their goal is. And so the goal is to write many novels. And the thing is like, you are going to grow and get better over the course of writing multiple books. And that's part of like establishing your writing career. And I think Brandon Sanderson is such a great example of this, because he wrote Mistborn. That Mistborn was his second book that was published. And it's a great book. Strong, rock solid, but let's also know he wrote and pitched, I believe, 13 books prior to getting his first traditional publishing contract. I think I have that number right. But he wrote a lot of books, which meant he completed a lot of projects, learned a lot about storytelling, and then that 14th book was the one that finally hit. So Mistborn then, right, is kind of his next book, but it's only the second book or so that he published. But what you notice is Mistborn and the Mistborn trilogy, phenomenal, great work, great writing, great plotting. But his later books get even better because you notice how he grows as a writer. So he's very plot centric with decent character development in the Mistborn trilogy. But by the time you get to the Stormlight Archives, his character development has come so far and has so many more layers and so much more nuance to it. So Brandon Sanderson is like the most prolific fantasy writer we have right now, and he is growing as a writer. So if Brandon Sanderson has permission to grow over the course of books, I am positive that anybody who's writing right now also has that same permission.
Mm-hmm. And I would even say that part of that is like, for me, and I think this is becoming clearer, the more you have the integration of AI and you have the integration of other ways to work with story, it's this thing of not only growing as a writer, but growing as a storyteller and understanding what a lot of those differences are and what do those differences mean to you. So when I'm working with clients, the reason why I like for them to write and publish or write and complete and write again is because you really don't know what you've learned until you step away from it.
Yeah.
Until you get to the end, you step back, you look at it, and then we can really dive into, well, what did you feel like you did well? What are some things that you'd want to change? We can look at some of your comps and some of those books that you feel like this is really where I would like for this to be my lane. We can make a guesstimation of like how close we are to that and what are the next best moves that we can make to get you closer. But more than that, I think it takes the pressure off of this one has got to be it.
Yeah. Oh man, nothing will really put a damper on your creativity like all of the pressure riding on this single book. Like that's so much pressure for any one thing to bear.
And it's really unreasonable. I mean, and this is why whenever I talk to people, and I've talked to you over the years, and you are still writing the same book, Houseway, I do not understand. And so therefore, because that's their process, I just have to be quiet. But inside, I have all the questions. I'm like, but at the same time, I think that's also why having a sort of alignment with the type of coach that you work with is so important, because if that is someone, I would not be your person. Could I actually get you there? Yes, I could. But you would probably go insane, because I'm not going to let you go drive me insane. We are not going to keep talking about the same story over and over again. I would just be like, listen, Linda, listen. And I don't think that that necessarily is a bad thing. I just feel like I think you can underestimate how much you learn from writing from your characters and your stories. Like there is this sort of reciprocal process of like what you're pouring in versus what you are learning through the process of navigating these people and navigating them in this world and navigating them to the other side and getting to their happy place. And you can sit back and say, oh, wow, I would have done this different because this person needed this. It's almost like having children. Like when you have more than one child, the way you address one and the way you handle one is not the same as the way you handle the other. If you want them to be the absolute best that you can help them mold and nurture them to be. And that's the way I feel about that, the book process. Same goes for different series. There's different flavors and everything. And I think when we are hyper focused on one book, it's almost like you can't see it because you're too close.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing that is, really important, I think, because you also work with some fantasy writers, and it's a big thing for fantasy writers. The thing about fantasy is because they're usually longer books, they do tend to require a longer process if you're not rapid publishing. I mean, there are some fantasy writers who and they're just moving,
especially
they're
now.
just flying. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh man. But a lot of times, because you're working with a book that's 100,000 words plus, it's really interesting because it does require more time simply by virtue of the length of the story. But that's also, I think, where and this is something that, because one of the questions that you put in here as a like a little preview, or you asked what are the benefits of leaning into the process and working with a coach and editor, right? And I think this is one of those places where that can really, really help you, because you're looking to find that line between crafting a working arc and crafting a book is, again, especially at that longer word count where you need to keep a reader engaged and invested through 100,000 plus words. And so you have a tight plot, strong character arcs without obsessing over without obsessing over all of the details, or making it, again, the most perfect book that it can be. And I find that in fantasy, that can be quite a lot harder than in crime. Because I think a lot of times, and we've talked about this before, fantasy can be a slightly more literary genre, where especially if you're trying to go traditional published, people are looking for, they want something fresh. Fantasy readers have read lots of stuff and they want to see something new, and they can, I don't know how else to say this, but they can be quite a bit pickier about what's in the book, versus crime. Crime is plot oriented, and if you make a good puzzle and you keep them reading and you have a good reveal, now obviously the mechanics to get there are important, but you can, type 60,000 words, 70,000 words, and you can pack that book up, ship it, and get to the next one. So that some of the delineations, I think, between the genres is part of why it's really helpful to have someone to walk you through the process to help you do that, and also help you catch where you're obsessing unnecessarily. Because if you want to write a lot of my fantasy writers want to write 3 books in a trilogy. But we can't write 3 books if we haven't written 1 book. Like we gotta write the first one before we can write the second and the third. And finding that balance and having someone to help you do that, I think, can really alleviate some of the Sturm and Drang of that process.
Well, yes, and it can help you get out of the weeds, right? Because sometimes you don't know that you're in it until somebody say, "Hey, girl, like, come on." Let me, like, what is this really about? But yeah, I do agree. And you did it. And I think leaning in is also leaning into the fact that you have the experiential knowledge to be able to guide them through, even when you're asking them to do a thing that they don't quite understand yet, right? Because sometimes it's not that, for example, like, go ahead and let's move to the next act, and you understand that when they get clarity in this one, they can go back and kind of build a bridge. And y'all can't see my hands, my bad. But to build a bridge, but you know that because you've done it enough, and the more that they trust you and they're working with you, then they will lean in on that experience until they have it for themselves. And I think that's the other part where it's this, I think it's a lot more about trust than I ever would have said as one of the factors. But now, so many years later, that is probably one of the biggest reasons why people stay even long after they probably need it, right? Of course, we can do even better together when we've had history, but having that sort of bubble of trust and having someone that you're working with that knows your work and knows your strengths and knows where you want to take this thing. Because let me tell you, I'm not the one that's going to let you sit. I will crack a whip, and I dare somebody to tell me not to. Because I'm like, this is what you told me. You said you wanted this, so let's go get it. And I think that's one of those things where in this industry, you can miss out on, because it can be that you are out there solo dolo, and that does not feel good when you don't know how to maneuver, or you don't know who you can share things with to iron things out or talk through a story because it's stuck in your head, or and so that level of trust and intimacy between an editor or a coach, because I think for me that line straddles sometimes depending on the project, and a writer is so important. And that's where the magic happens, because if there's not this filter, they can talk about whatever, you could talk about whatever, and then when you get on the other side, it's like fire.
Yeah, and there's really something like magical that happens when you have someone, and you and I do this with each other, like in business, in writing and editing, like whatever, where when someone starts asking you questions and it gets your mind moving, and all of a sudden, you're finding answers, or you're getting ideas, or you're able to like help a writer pull on something an idea that they actually, it's like been in the back of their head and it's just been kind of like bumping around, or they haven't been able to like grasp it, and help them pull on that thread and generate new ideas or expand on an idea. And it's because like it's bringing you into a space of externally processing and actively engaging versus being stuck in your head. So whether, it's, your editor, your coach, or if you have, writer friends that you trust, like having people to engage with and get out of your own head and interact with the information and with other people, can really, really help, like, make those ideas actually take solid form and become like as good as they have the potential to be. So you're actualizing on that potential.
You know what? Here's the thing. One of the things that I absolutely love about this is the fact that this is where, for me, there's this like this rub between community, group, and individual. I feel like most people don't want to come up out their pocketbook for that individual. But let me tell you something. I get people's like, oh, you learn more in group. You do, because there are some people that are just good question askers, or there are things that you haven't experienced yet that you get to experience almost by osmosis, but just by being in the room. But when you have that one-on-one and y'all can go back and forth, and we don't even have to worry about the small talk because I know you and you know me, and we can go in. Let me tell you, there is something about that. That's why I fought group coaching for so long, because that relationship and having that in your pocket, oh yes, I really am going to be one of the best tools in your pocket, because I can say, oh, you remember when you did that in that book? And I have clients, oh, I do. Yeah. And the reason why we didn't do blah, 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 blah is because X, Y, and Z instead of forth. You are right. What if I did this? Oh, girl, I like where you going. Talk some more about that. Like, let's cop a squat there. And there's something about this. It's even better than a fireside chat, right? It's like, it is the fire. You're bringing the fire. Like, it's causing you to level up, because what we're doing is like, we can get beyond the small talk. We can get beyond the you're trying to hide details because you don't know if you can trust me. And it's almost like this really great co-creative energy that allows you as the writer to level up, and you haven't even hit the page yet. So when you hit the page, it's really on. And I think sometimes, like when you're in that grind of, think, plot, right, idea, plot, right. Sometimes you can miss that. And I don't know. I think as you were talking about that, it just made me realize, like, that's where, if you know you really want to level up, invest in yourself. Invest in yourself in enough to say, okay, maybe you do it for a year. Maybe you're going to do it for a year. And where, yes, we are working on one book or two books or three books, but it's about more than those individual books. We're beginning to piecemeal through that writing process who you are as a writer. What can your readers expect? What is the promise that you're giving them? Can you deliver on that promise? If you can't, where do we need to get you right, girl? Look, look, dude, where we need you to soften up. You know what I mean? Whatever it is, because what happens is, I think we can underestimate the fact that writing is a, what do you want to call it? I can't think of the word right now, but it builds upon itself.
Almost like an iterative process.
That's what I wanted. It's an iterative process. It's like it builds upon itself. You begin to see what it is you want. And if you're someone that you are like in romance and you're working with the series, you even have the iterative process in your series creation. Because now once you have it under your belt, you're like, man, I didn't like this. Readers liked it, but I really wish it would have happened like this. Or it was hard for me to manage this information. And then we can say, okay, then we can begin to shore up your process.
Yeah.
On top of your words. And then you listen. It's like, I just want to tell people, write and release so that you are active. Your tools are sharp. Your mind is sharp. You know what you like and what you don't like. You know how your readers respond and they don't respond, but also give yourself enough time so that you really can create the type of foundation where you can do anything you put your mind to. And that takes time, even if you have experience. So when you are in that collaborative environment, you can shorten that learning curve because you're not banking on you identifying and seeing everything. And I think there's such a difference between having clients that you are working with regularly than when someone only comes to for a developmental edit. Because you come back with 100,000. I have clients with 160,000 word story, and I gotta tell you, you threw this thing off Act 1.
Yeah. Oh man, that is the news you hate to. You're like, oh no, how do I tell? Oh no.
Listen, and you know, because we've had these conversations. And there's something about being connected through that process, where I've had clients where they have longer stories, and because we are touching base throughout the writing process, it makes the editing process so much easier because we've already addressed it. Now, sometimes they just don't execute well, but it is hardly ever a page 1 rewrite because we've already done the work. And now what I'm looking for is, do you know how to take what we said and turn it into words on a page?
Yeah.
And so that was a little bit of a soapbox, but I think it's still, because I'm like, listen, because the different ways in which you engage with an editor now or a book coach is so different. And sometimes I think there's so many factors and you have to know yourself. But I think there's something about entering into it and maybe even saying, this is what I really would like. This is how I see my career over 3 or 5 years or over the next year. And then having a discussion even from that place. Because there are times when I tell people, remember, we're writing this book, but we're building a skill. That's not one book, right?
Yeah.
That what would you learn to work with me through on this book is going to carry you. So when you think about dollars and costs or how much it takes to be that you're investing to work with someone, it's not like you scrap it, it goes away, and when you start the next book, you're starting over from scratch. That's not how this works. And I think that is one of those things that you don't always get the opportunity to be like, okay, remember, we're building here. You don't lose that, you gain. The more that we're able to sort of cycle through, and then we can fix your process. Here's how you outline. Like I can even have some clients, all right, you get near that edge because you'll start tapping out when it's time to write because you're taking too long here or whatever, you know? And I think that's the part too, where having someone along that journey, that's where I'm going, along that journey helps to make it better and help to hopefully make you better.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to ask one of these questions that I had because a lot of what we're talking about and have been talking about is kind of like new writers and where their struggle, what it helps to understand when you're getting. But this, of course, also applies to seasoned writers. It's like, if you're looking to level up in your career, if you feel like your books are stalling out, like those are the times when you're like, oh man, you can bring someone into the process. And that's something that I love about book coaching is that, like, my hope for most of the clients who come when I'm kind of doing consultations with clients to see, are we a good fit? Am I the right person for you to work with? Can I help you with your specific problems? All that kind of thing. My hope for most of my coaching clients when I take them on is that we'll work together through all of their books in the future, that this becomes a lifelong relationship where they are growing and creating and releasing and growing and creating and releasing, and that this is an ongoing relationship where I become, just like you said, I become that tool in their tool belt that they always have on hand, that they're always, ready to reach for when they need it, and that it's like participating in that growth process. And so that's really, honestly, that's the joy of coaching, I think, is fostering and developing a relationship like that. So when you have, because we talked a little bit about, some of the pitfalls that new writers will run into generally. And I just wanted to ask, like, when you have new romance writers coming in, what are some of the like mistakes or pitfalls that you see specific to, you know, writing your first or second romance, and like what are some of those the best word I can come up with is like pitfalls for people who are new to writing romance, or what people misunderstand about taking on writing romance?
You know what? Again, this is our second recording of this, and I will say this. I kind of beatboxed through the first time you asked me this question because I'm like, we can go anywhere with this. But I think if I had to say it is, I wouldn't say it's two things. Well, there's a lot, but the two things I want to focus on. One, structure matters. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I have probably even in my own right as a coach and a developmental editor, underestimate the fact that most people don't know that. They think because they read or because they read a book that automatically means that they have the flow of story down. And I find that if you don't know that, that can already be a silent killer. And and it's probably become one of the biggest things that I'm always having to shore up, because I start realizing it when they start submitting stuff back in, or I look at their outlines, or I get their manuscript, that they have no idea about the why you move from act 1 to act 2. Mm-hmm. What is the thing that needs to happen that pushes us over? Where do your characters need to be? And I think we overestimate the fact that there's this formulaic thing. And the reason why when people say formulaic thing, now I would attribute that to they're talking about the fact that we always have a happily ever after, and or we always use the same or similar tropes. But what they also don't realize is that is also informed in how we move through the story. Yeah. How our characters are as people in Act 1 versus where they are in Act 3. Those are things that when you get that, it will help you begin to delineate, well, what types of scenes do I need to have in this act? What are the things that I want to have happen? What is that unexpected thing? What type of twist? And I think the fact that, again, we think of formula, but we don't always think about what that structure is and what is I don't want to say expected, but I'm going to use it so we move forward. Expected in each one of those acts to move it forward. And with that, how much that benefits them in the writing and editing process. When you can begin to say, oh, this is my act 1, this is my act 2, this is my act 3. When you're able to sort of put those little bookmarks or earmark those places, and then you can just double down and just focus on act 1, or just double down and focus on that middle mid-book moment, it just makes a huge difference. So that's the first thing, structure. The second thing is the fact that I really, again, I think a thing that I underestimated because I naturally seek to do it, structure, I always love doing it because I love plotting. In this thing, reading. People don't read enough.
That's what I had in my head too.
Oh my goodness. And when people and my thing was always, you hear, read and read wide, read and read wide. What does that mean? Because people don't realize, and it's not until like my students get me in book club and they're like, oh, this is what you mean. Exactly. You read like a writer. Don't read like a reader. You should not be chomping on popcorn. Your feet should not be propped up. Girl, you better sit forward and grab a pencil. Look, grab a highlighter, some post-it notes, like you want to get paid up in here. And I think it's one of those things where, again, working with someone pays off in spades, because learning how to read like a writer, learning what you're looking for, I have this one student and she is so phenomenal at asking questions. And I think she is so great at asking questions because she doubts herself, because English is not her first language, but she is very perceptive. And baby, let me tell you, she don't just ask a surface question. She get under that baby, she roll around, she get off in the mud, and I'd be like, come on, let me answer the question. Because when you start understanding what those nuances is, what those levels are, then when you sit down to create your characters, your mind is going to be bubbling. It's going to be bubbling with all the different things that you can do, the directions you can take, why you're taking them, how you're going to turn that heat up until it's simmering. And it comes from being a student, but also a participant in your market. And so I think people underestimate, and I get it. You hear people say, well, I don't read, I just write. And I think back in the day, you could probably get away with that. You did not have millions of books being published a month or whatever the number is. I don't know what the number is. There are so many books that are being published now, and it's not about just in a thing of being competitive or being yes, you want to be the best that you can be. But I think what it is this understanding of a romance today is not the same as a romance 10 years ago. Heck, not even 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And understanding that so that you can deliver in a way that only you can deliver, it will help you in all the ways that we've talked about in this conversation, but also in building a career that has legs. It can go into the future. And I think structure and reading plays a big part in the process of working with someone, but I think more than anything of building a career.
Yeah. And I think that's something that, it's really easy to miss the value of, like, when, and it's so cool because I've had some clients where I'm like, all right, we're gonna read this book. Why don't you take a look at it? And they do it because I asked them to, right? They're like, okay, like what? Sometimes you can feel that they're like, whatever you say, and I'm like, all right, just go with me. And they will they'll read the book and maybe even especially with my crime writers, they'll read the first one and they'll be like, okay, and it's like a little like they're like, I see you, kind of. And then we'll read another book, and then we'll read a third book, and this is, you've talked about this, it wasn't this episode, but it was one of our recent ones, where basically you talk about being able to produce those insights for yourself. So you can listen to us and you can be like, okay, that's interesting, or like, that's cool, or whatever, and it can still help you still grow. But the moment when you shift into that headspace of being able to identify what's happening in a story and recognizing and realize, like, having those insights yourself, your world starts to open up. And I watch it happen with my clients where 2, 3, 4 books in, and suddenly when they show up to talk to me and we talk about that book, they're like, oh, I see this thing and how it's working, and I want to do this thing in my book. Or, oh, I see how this book differs from this other book, and I liked this one better, so I'm going to shift my book more in this direction. And it helps them to not just understand structure, which is essential, because, if your book doesn't have, just like if your book doesn't have a spine, then it's,
it's loosey-goosey.
Exactly. But it also helps my writers to identify their own style or their own preference in how books play out, the kinds of tone that they like, the kinds of prose that they like. Because my writers are all across the gamut between leaning more toward that literary side and being much more like functional, straightforward prose that's a little more pared down in their genre, right? And so, but you have to do it, and you have to do it lots, right? So like it's not just like I'm gonna read one book and I'm like, all right, I understand how crime works. You gotta look across the gamut. You have to read lots of books and see different authors doing it, and then, like you said, engage that process actively. It's good to read. That's a great place to start, but you want to lean in, get out your highlighters, get out your sticky notes, because this is where you're really going to actively engage that learning process, and it makes a huge difference in your work. So that, when you were talking about, what writers kind of, the pitfalls and what's like most important, my brain was like, ooh, if I were answering this question, I'd be like, reading. And you went and you came right in with that point. So yeah, structure and reading, I think, are those two major essentials for growing your craft and getting sort of legs under you in your genres for sure.
And we're about to close out. I will add one additional note to that. I think what it also does when you have several that you are engaging in as a collective between you and that client, it also means that as an editor and as a coach, I can also call upon that, right? Because sometimes they don't realize what was happening. And I can say, you know what? You remember this scene in this book and you remember this scene in that book. Let's talk about those. And then what we can begin to do is extract, right? We begin to sort of extract things and then like, now, can you do this like this and this like this? Oh yeah. Well, then how would you do it? And that is where it's sort of this, again, that co-collaborative process, right? And so, yes, with that said, because we are rounding it out, is there anything, any final notes that you would like to share before we close out this special edition of Story Deep Dive?
No, there's just one thing that I want to say, and I think everybody, if you're on my newsletter, if you have listened to me on the podcast at all, like you're going to hear me say this, and probably Dana say this constantly, and I'm going to keep saying it, leaning into the creative life, right? Like reading is a part of your creative life, and leaning into growing as a writer, like these, we get to tell stories. We get to be creative, and it's a tremendous privilege and a tremendous joy. And and sometimes you can kind of like lean back on that because some days you're pulling your hair out, and that's writing is just like that sometimes. And every other creative will tell, like every creative in every other discipline will tell you the same thing. Painters, musicians, photographers, right? All of the creative disciplines, this is just a fact of life. It is about practice and growing and engaging the process and reminding yourself of the joy when the joy feels like it's over here and not right here at hand. But reading is one of those ways to really fuel that joy of creativity and to fuel that curiosity to keep you moving forward. So I just wanted to kind of add that plug to like remember that like this is a tremendous joy and a tremendous privilege of what we get to do, and because we're talking about reading is a great way to continue to fuel that joy and that curiosity. So yes, soapbox, let's step down.
And tap in because you want to create that for someone else, right? You want to get those feels, and like when your heart dropped, now you want to go back and say, how did they do it? Follow the crumb trail, follow the crumb trail. So with that said, y'all, this has been a fantastic episode. I'm sure we're going to do others whenever we have long months. So at any time, you can visit us online at storydeepdive.com and place your questions throughout our now. Y'all, we got a catalog. Come on, because we got some books under our belts. With that said, we will see you all in next episode, where we will have our very first episode in our overview of our next reading selection, which is The Whistleblower. And listen, y'all, Rachel was trying to come for me, but your girl was ready. So with that said, we are out. Thank you so much as always for joining us, and we will see you all in the next episode. And as always, happy writing. Goodbye.